One of my favorite movies of all time has to be Patton. It's the story of the great American general in the Second World War. I'd say it's in my top 10, but I have 14 movies in my top 10, so I'm not exactly sure where to place it. It's kind of like the way the PGA has a leaders board. There's number 1, and then 4 guys at number 2, and someone at number 7. And you never know who's number 3 or 4, but it all melts together, I guess, somehow. But anyway, it's a great movie. It starts with a very memorable scene of General Patton giving this speech to his gathered soldiers about the kind of courage and determination you have to have in order to go into battle. But all I really heard as a young kid watching that movie was this string of profanities that came out of his mouth. I was sure my mother was going to wash my mouth out with soap back then, just for hearing it. But it was a great story, and here's this brilliant leader and this brilliant commander. But I thought during the movie it demonstrated a real change of character on his part, something that he underwent a change because of the circumstances and the things that happened to him. He begins, and throughout the movie he's this very strong leader, a very disciplined person. He demands discipline, he demands attention from his soldiers. He expects them to follow military protocol, expects them to be courageous and to work hard, and has very, very high demands of everybody that is around him. And just a brilliant person, even though he could be very crude and kind of ruthless in himself. But there's also a certain arrogance and aloofness about him, and one of this is demonstrated in a scene where he is sitting in a jeep, and these soldiers come walking by who've been wounded, and they're very disoriented and very lost, and he never looks at them. He never even gives them a moment's worth of attention, and they pass by, obviously in pain and suffering, and he shows no concern for them whatsoever. In fact, it seems to be that's his determination not to allow their suffering to enter into his life. Well, without trying to recapture the entire movie, that kind of arrogance is the thing that actually led to his downfall. And he is removed from office, from his command by General Eisenhower. It's a true story, of course. He's removed from his position, and he has to, in a certain sense, ride the bench for a while, just dying because he doesn't have a chance to be in there. What he believes his whole life, his whole destiny was all about, so that he could fight in this war. Eventually he's given another chance, and he begins to lead the soldiers again. He never loses his daring, his demanding, his ruthlessness, everything that made him a great general, his brilliance about how to bring force into a situation. But what he does have is some humility that enters in. And I saw it demonstrate at least a couple of different scenes. One, there's this traffic jam of tanks and military hardware that are trying to get with it, and they're all just clogged up. And he personally goes down and he starts directing the traffic so that everybody gets through, and then he tells another guy to take over for him. And maybe I'm mixing the scenes up a little bit, I don't remember exactly right. But he's standing on a hill and he's watching his troops march by, and he says to an aide, "Look at them, Harvey. They have no food, no rest, marching away from one battle into the next. God, I love him. God, I love him." And from there he walks down and he starts walking with the rest of his troops, and he joins them, and you can just tell how much he was adored by these men, and he's caring about them. He's just really involved in their life. Kind of gives me chills just thinking about that scene. Here was this almost godlike figure to them, but he came down and he walked with them, and he loved them. He wanted to be a part of them. Well, there is this change. There's this humility that enters in. He's no longer aloof and separated from the rest of them. Instead, he wants to come down to them and be a part of it. I think he's an example of what St. Paul was speaking about today in that second reading of strength in one's weakness. That St. Paul had to come to an understanding that this thorn in the flesh, whatever it may have been that he was suffering, whatever it was that he had, that God was not going to remove this from him. And that I think what it was really was his pride. That it was his pride that was, in a certain sense, a thorn in his flesh. He wanted to be perfect. He wanted to have everything just right, so he'd exert his power. Instead, God allowed him to experience humiliation and allowed him to become a humble person so that through that weakness, power would reach its perfection. I think that those men would never have become great followers of the general if he had remained a very aloof person. He could have been brilliant and may have known the right thing to do, but they would not have followed him unless he had become one with them, unless he had taken on their life. Almost exactly, isn't it, what Jesus himself does? Comes down and lives our life with us. So of course we can say to ourselves, well, I'm not that kind of person. I'm no great, not only not a military leader, I don't fit the profile of some great leader who stands aloof from other people. I don't have great power in my own life. Who am I? How can I identify with this admittedly kind of extreme example, extreme character in General Patton? Yet everybody here exercises some power. Everybody has some power in their life. You may not recognize it. You may not necessarily own it. And I think in some ways it's very healthy for people to acknowledge the power that they have in their life, to own it, to recognize how they influence and touch the lives of other people. Otherwise, you're maybe influencing without taking responsibility, or simply, I guess that's it, not taking responsibility for your life. But everybody has some power. If you're a parent, you have some power. You have very important power over the lives of your children. If you're a professional person, people look to you to exercise your authority in a responsible way. If you meet somebody who is in need and you can help them, isn't that a form of power? If you're a friend to somebody else, and I certainly hope everybody here has some friends. If we are a friend, that friendship means that we have some power, some influence over other people. How do we exercise that power? How do we express it in our life? Well, if we're going to be healthy about it, we too have to have some of that humility in our exercise of power. That humility that allows power to reach its perfection because it isn't all about ourselves. And what is humility? It's one of those, for me, a difficult thing to define. Maybe it's difficult because I don't experience it very much in my own life. But humility is an essential, I think, for the Christian faith. And that humility is typically said to be simply the truth about ourselves, the truth about other people. I think that's a traditional answer. Somebody else said to me last night that humility was seeing yourself as God sees you. And I think that's a wonderful explanation of humility. Seeing yourself as God sees you, seeing other people as God sees them, not just in their defects, not just in their perfection, but seeing themselves as God sees us. Those are great answers to me. Humility isn't the same as low self-esteem, as it's popular to talk about. That's denying the goodness that exists within us, and it isn't, again, arrogance that sees ourselves as superior to others. But I think Patton's example also is a way to understand humility, that humility is always walking with other people, that when he quits sitting in the Jeep and being aloof from others, but got down and walked with his soldiers, that he became one with them and joined them on their journey. And after all, I think this is really the example of Jesus himself. He's the one who, as St. Paul says, cast aside his divinity and took on our human flesh and walked with us. He lived our life. He ate our food. He slept. He was tired. He worked. And ultimately, of course, he died. In his case, a brutal death, accepting the worst of human condition. Yet he accepted that human condition and walked with us because of his infinite, should we say, humility of his life. The man who was the greatest leader was also the one who was the most humble. We're all on a spiritual journey. And on that spiritual journey, we can't take the Jeep. We have to walk, and we walk that journey with other people. I want to follow that up just briefly.